Object properties for lettering has things like letter height, letter width, slant angle, and then these weird things called kerning marks. What do I do with these? How do I scale my lettering appropriately to get the look I'm going for? And what do I do to manipulate my letter forms the way that I want them? To start off, let's create some lettering. So I'm going to click on my lettering tool. I'm going to click on screen. And I'm just going to type. I'm going to go in all caps right now. I'm going to hit enter to complete my lettering element. And then I'm going to right click in here and I'm going to go to properties. And I want to look at this first bit up here. So the first thing we have is the alphabet. So I can definitely select whichever alphabet I want. And they are divided in categories. So if I want a script, I can look through a script. Or if I want a block, I can look through the blocks. If I know the name of it, I can also just come in here and begin typing. So if I wanted Artemis, I could type that. Or if I wanted Deco block, I could just type Deco. If the name of it has script in it, you can even type script and you'll get any of them that, in this case, end in script. So let's go back to basic block. If I wanted to, I could print the selected fonts preview. I could also print all of them if I wanted, just to print out and have either I could print to PDF and have them all in a PDF that I could look at, or I could print them to paper, I suppose, if I wanted to. Next, we have the lettering type. So let's go into 3D, so this will make a little bit more sense. So this first one I'm going to bring up here. And then I'm going to duplicate it, come down here, and I'm going to do that one more time just so we can see the differences. It's not exactly where I want it. There we go. All right, so the first one that I have up here is kind of my standard stitching, and that is where I will have turning satin stitches throughout my letter forms. I can have different stitch directions. I can have overlapping bits. Let's make this next one something different. So I'm going to go down to flat fill and I'm going to hit apply. And so flat fill will turn this all into just a single direction, flat, complex fill. And then the last option I have is vector. So vector, if I look at my stitch count, you can see I have absolutely no stitches in it. Vector just turns the lettering into vector artwork in case I want to digitize over it later, or if I need to use it for a more graphic reason. All right, so that is my lettering type. You've got standard, which is kind of your turning satins or whatever, honestly, whatever the digitizer digitized. The next one in the options is flat fill. That is a flat, complex fill. And then the last option we have is that vector option. And that is, everything is vector artwork, but I could go in and I could change the spelling if I needed to. I could still edit it just like it's normal lettering. All right, so I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to delete these two. I'm going to look at this one a little bit more closely. So let's right click, go to properties again. And let's look at the next bit right here. And this is the height, so letter height. So as I change this, I could change this to 0.75. And I'm dealing in inches right now. When I hit apply, you can see that it scaled my lettering, and it scaled it proportionally. Let's go back to 1. So letter height changes the letters proportionally. Now what I want you to be a little bit careful of is you'll notice that my letter height and my overall element height are just slightly different. Right now they're just barely different. Now if I was doing something with lowercase and maybe something with a descender like a Y, I'm going to hit apply so you can see I've got that descender hanging down. My letter height still says 1 inch, but my element is sitting at just over 1.25 inches. And so why is that? So I have another design up that will help explain this a little bit. So the letter height deals with some kind of anatomy of typography, and letter height measures from the baseline, that's this line here, to the cap height, that's this here. So it kind of ignores any descenders. If you had extreme flourishes that came up over the cap height, that would be ignored as well. So it measures from the cap height to the baseline, or from the baseline to the cap height. And then this other line is just called the X height. While the baseline and the cap height for alphabets are relatively consistent, you may see flourishes fall outside of that cap height or baseline. So if I choose a script, something like legend, you can see that, well, it comes over the cap height just a little. It definitely goes below the baseline. That's up to the type designer, how those letter forms kind of fall on those cap heights and baselines and X heights. And you can see this one has a much lower X height than the last one did. And then the descender is way low. So all of that is completely dependent on the type designer. DESIGNSHOP just measures from the baseline to the cap height and says, okay, that's 1 inch, even though clearly here the design is at 1.5 inches. We are stating with letter height that from the baseline to the cap height, we want to be 1 inch. So let's go back. And let's go back into properties and let's look at the width. So I'm going to change this back to all caps, just so we have something a little more even to look at. And then I'm going to begin to change the width. So I will set this to 120%. What the letter width does is it changes the width of the characters, but it leaves the height the same. So it's basically just stretching them horizontally. And you can go either direction. I could take this to 80%. And the software is not going to limit you. So I could take this down to 10%. And the software would do it. Now, chances are this isn't going to sew very well. I would probably stay between 70% to 130%. And some alphabets will do better one way. Some alphabets will do better the other. That's completely dependent upon the letter forms, how thick they are, how thin they are. If I change the width too thin, am I going to be sewing smaller than a needle? That's the stuff that I need to be concerned with. So I tend to stay around 100%, but I will go 30% kind of either way as my somewhat safe zone. Other options I have, I can change the slant angle. So I can put in 20 degrees here, hit apply, and I can begin to mimic an italicized alphabet or an italicized font. And I can go the other direction by putting in a negative number. So if I type a negative number in there, it will slant the other way. I can make it look like it's going really fast. And then again, software is not going to limit me. I can do crazy things. Now I'm starting to get to the point where this is going to start stretching stitches and it's going to start sewing poorly. So I need to be careful with that. Let's go back to maybe 10 degrees. And that's something a little bit more normal. So for slant angle, I tend to stay 20 degrees either way, positive or negative, as kind of my maximum good idea area. And then width, I stay 30% one way or the other. We've dealt with the alphabet, we've dealt with letter height, width, slant angle, and now we get to deal with kerning. Kerning and adding trims. Kerning is something that is adjusting the space between individual pairs of letters. It's something that anybody dealing with typography for very long at all has to deal with. And inserting trims is something that any embroiderer has to deal with. And how do I get trims between my letters where I want them and when I want them? So here I have a couple of examples. The first one is all connected. This is great, except I don't really want this trim between my M and my E. So I'm going to go into my properties. Right click, properties to get there. And I'm going to look down for this little pair of scissors. I'm going to insert my cursor where I want that trim. And I'm going to explicitly say, put a trim here. So I'm going to click on this pair of scissors. It's going to insert this icon. When I hit apply, that little connector just went away. So inserting trims, you can insert them manually in your lettering just by inserting your cursor where you want them and hitting this trim icon. You could also choose to trim only between the words, only when specified, which is only when I'm putting this in here or when my trim length is exceeded, or trim between letters. So trim between letters will trim between every letter. And that's completely an embroiderer's choice. I would not have that on for scripts that are connected. And then I would just insert a trim where I wanted them if I needed to, if it was not exceeding my trim length. Trim between words is the default. I think that's a pretty good one most of the time. If you're dealing with small letters, you want them to be connected. Okay, so let's look at this next object. This is toy box. And how does that spacing look? Not so great, right? So this is an older alphabet. Its spacing could be better. So it's relatively even, at least between these three. The O's pretty close, but I'm looking at the space between all the letters. And honestly, this space between the T and the O looks like a bigger space than anywhere else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my cursor in between the T and the O, and I'm going to click on this tool. And that inserts this little kind of a double less than symbol, and I will hit apply, and it will scoot those two closer together. So I'm going to do that again. Insert my cursor, insert the remove space icon, hit apply, and it scoots closer together. And you could do this so many times that my letters would start to overlap. So the spacing is completely up to you. I'm going to take a few of these out. I'm going to take a few more of those out. And maybe one more. All right, so now this looks fairly even. It might be a little close right here. So if you needed to add space, you could insert the cursor and use the next one, which adds space. And I'm going to take out a little space between the X and the O, insert my cursor, click on that, hit apply, and then my O just shifted over. So now it's spaced a little more evenly. So these are tools if you want to go in and kind of manually dictate where the trims are, manually move your letters back and forth and specify, I want less space here or more space there. I'm showing you how to space things, add trims only where you want them, change your trim settings, but honestly, to set up for this video, I had to go in and tweak the defaults just to make things show up inappropriately for me so that I could go in and show you how to fix them. So a lot of times the defaults may be taking care of a lot of this for you and you don't have to worry about it as much. But if you do see these problems come up, you've got the tools to fix them. Okay, so pretty much everything we just did with the numbers I can do graphically. So letter height, that's basically scaling, right? Well, we know how to scale. If I have an element selected, I've got the resize edit box around it. If I click on this corner, I can scale any which way I want. If I want it to be proportional, like it would be if I was adding that number, I would hold Shift on my keyboard and it would be proportional. Let's take this back down. If I wanted to go from the center out, I could hold Alt, and that would go center out. If I wanted it to do both, center out and proportional, I would hold both Shift and Alt. It would go from the center, and it would be proportional. So I'm going to hit undo a couple times and get back to that 1-inch lettering. Okay, so we've dealt with letter height. We can scale it, and we get the same result. And in fact, if I do scale it, you'll notice that my letter height does change. Okay, so leaving letter height where it is, let's change the letter width. So if I go over this side, either side will do it. If I'm in Resize Edit and I go over the side, I can change just the width. So my letter height stayed exactly the same, but if I right click and I go to Properties, you can now see that my width is very, very different. Okay, so let's go back, undo, undo. So now we're down to 1 inch. Let's do that again. I'm just grabbing the side and stretching it, clicking and dragging and moving it over. And now you can see my width has changed. All right, so I'm going to hit undo. Something you can do graphically that's a little bit harder to do with the numbers is you can change just the height and leave the width exactly where it was. So if I, for some reason, wanted exactly 3.64 in my width, but I need it to be a little bit taller, I can grab the handle in the middle at the top and drag it up. And what it's actually doing is it's changing both of these numbers. So it changed my letter height, but then it changed my width to compensate so that it stays the same width. And since I don't want to do that kind of math, this kind of thing's a little bit easier to do graphically. So I'm going to hit undo and go back. Okay, so we've touched letter height graphically, we've touched letter width. Let's deal with slant. So I can't do that with the Resize Edit box, but I can definitely do that if I click again and I go to the rotate mode. So rotate, which I could grab a corner and I could rotate. Let me undo. When I'm in rotate, if I go over the top, I can slant it. If I go over the side, I can skew it. And that too is something that'd be a little bit more difficult to deal with the numbers. If I look at it, you can see I've got a slant angle. It's been rotated. I would not want to do that. With the numbers, I would much rather just grab the handles and get it the way that I want it. Okay, so let me undo and go back. So we've dealt with letter height, letter width. We just did slant angle. It works both directions. I can go forward. I can go backwards. Undo, undo. And so we've got slant that we can deal with. Now, everything that I just did to the full lettering, I can do to individual characters too. So if I click on the handle of a letter, that's this little X that appears. If I click on the handle of the letter, I can scale it. If I hold Shift, it'll stay proportional. So I can scale it. I can skew it. I can slant it. Now I can skew it. I could rotate it. I can even drag it along the baseline. If I wanted to, I could hold Control and drag it off of the baseline. So I just did way too many things. Let's back all that up. Undo, 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 undo. All right, so we're back where we started. So select it by clicking on it. That gets the individual letter. I got my Resize Edit box just around my one letter. I can scale it by clicking on the corner. If I want the letter width, I can go on just the side, right? I'm holding Alt to go from the center out. The width. Now the width, even if I'm holding Alt, it will still go from the baseline. It's not going to shift off of that baseline. Okay, so now we're back to normal. But what you can use some of that for is, if I look at this, I could be a little bit closer to the E, L, C, O with that M. Well, if I click on the handle, I can drag it a little bit closer so you can graphically kern, which is handy. If I wanted every other letter to be a different color, I could click on one letter, the handle of one letter, hold Control, click on another, and click on another, and then I could change their colors. That's kind of fun. Other things we could do. We could begin to get more elaborate drop caps. So think about once upon a time, ellipsis. And okay, I might prefer this in a serif. So let's do century. There we go. And if I wanted it to trim between these letters, I could change this to trim between letters. There we go. But now what I can also do is I can select that first letter and I can give myself a bit of a drop cap. So I can make this bigger. I could make it something black letter to make it a little bit more ornate. I could drag it off the baseline. So if I hold Control, I can click on this handle and drag it off the baseline. And then I think that's starting to look a little bit more like a fairy tale. If I want to select multiple letters at one time, click on the handle of one, gets the box around it, hold Control, click on the handle of the other. Now, if I click on the handle again, it will deselect the other and go to just a selection. But if I wanted to move the N, C, and E a little bit farther away from this O, now I could just move the O to the left, but if I click on one, hold Control, click, click on the handle of each one of these, then if I click within this box, I can drag these, and no matter where my cursor is, it's sliding right along that baseline. There, I think that's a little bit better, don't you? So now you've got a lot of tools at your fingertips for making lettering just the way that you want it. And you can use the numbers, you can do it graphically. How do I decide which method I'm going to use? It's what fits my job the best. If somebody comes up to me and says, I want a 1-inch serif letter on the top of my Christmas stocking, I will go to serif, I will choose that alphabet, and I will type in 1 inch and I will put it across. But if I'm trying to match somebody's artwork that I have pulled up behind it, then I typically would do things a little bit more graphically, right? Because instead of trying to guess at the size of things, I can just move my lettering over that artwork and scale it the way that I want it. I can manipulate it. All those things that we did graphically, we can do to better match the logo or artwork that we're trying to match. So it's completely up to you which method you use, but you've got a lot of ways to make the lettering do exactly what you want it to do.